All right, so we are doing sustainable aviation fuel for our topic. I'm Lindsay.
I'm Chase.
I'm Matt.
And here are our objectives. So by the end of this presentation, you should be able to have a clear understanding of what sustainable aviation fuel is and why there is a demand for it. Be able to compare the differences in environmental impact and cost of sustainable aviation fuel compared to other fuels used, and able to analyze the advantages and disadvantages of sustainable aviation fuel. So what is sustainable aviation fuel? Well, it is a fuel produced from a sustainable material and has a similar chemical makeup as jet fuel. Sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, has a significantly smaller carbon footprint. So there are three key elements that go into sustainable aviation fuel. And the first one is sustainability, pretty obvious, right? So it has to be something that can be continually resourced in an economic, social, and environmental way and conserves ecological balance while not drawing from natural resources. The second key is alternative feedstock to crude oil, so raw materials other than fossil fuels, such as oil, coal, or natural gas, which is what most fuels are made out of. And instead, sustainable aviation fuel is produced by materials such as cooking oil, plants, waste, and agricultural residues. And lastly, it has to be a fuel. So this means it meets all of the technical and certification requirements to be used in an aircraft, which again is pretty obvious. So when you think about it, it's pretty simple. It is sustainable. It is not regular jet fuel produced by something different, and it is a fuel, and we're able to use it in our airplanes. So there are other fuels there. It's all kind of in the testing phase still, but there's biofuels. And so this is fuels produced just by plant or animal byproducts or material. And then fuels that aren't biofuels, such as like the cooking oil, which is kind of like the most popular one right now. So why do we need sustainable aviation fuel? Well, aviation isn't really going anywhere. Right now, it is the only way to transport large number of people a significant distance in a timely manner. It's important for the future because aviation is a leading cause for carbon emissions, and typical jet fuel has up to 80% higher carbon emissions than sustainable aviation fuel. So it's pretty awesome that with just switching our fuels that we use in the airplanes, we're dropping that carbon footprint by 80%. How is it made? So this is a diagram by BP, and it goes through these steps. So it's from waste to wingtips. And step one is the feedstock is collected, and then feedstock is converted into sustainable aviation fuel. Step three is sustainable aviation fuel is blended with traditional jet fuel to make it usable for aircraft. And lastly, the fuel is delivered to the airport and put into our planes. So it is produced with sustainable feedstock, such as the cooking oil and non-palm waste oils. And these come from plants or animals. Solid waste from everyday homes and businesses like paper products, food scraps, or other items that would usually end up in a landfill. And other materials that they use is forestry waste. So it could be wood, crops, or plants such as algae is pretty popular. And currently BP is producing sustainable aviation fuel from cooking oil and animal fat and waste.
All right, so one of the main things that they're concerned with, as far as ICAO has said, is new sustainable fuels can reach higher performance than those already established, and they add additives to them to make them better than what jet fuel is right now. But another concern that they have found is in the testing process needs to be reliable and doesn't ruin the system on an airplane or anything like that. Yeah, ICAO has 5 alternative fuel conversion fuel conversion in process right now, being certified, and there's other processes in development. Yeah, as far as performance, they said it can meet the expectations, if not better. It just needs to be reliable. We'll go on to cost next. Another one of the main objectives is that sustainable fuel also can bring cheaper cost per gallon to use depending on which materials are used. Because as you can see, there's like vegetable oils, there's ethanol and other things that can be used for a sustainable fuel. It just needs to pass the testing process. But one good thing about this is producing a sustainable fuel also bring revenue to other industries like agriculture. Yeah, that's it for me.
Okay, so there's good advantages to sustainable aviation fuel. The first one is it's sustainable, so there will be someday like an infinite number of it compared to like right now with our fossil fuels. It's more of like a finite number, and we're going to run out of fuel that way if we're going to try and do that for the rest of the world or for the rest of our life and whatnot. Like we said earlier, it's going to reduce the global carbon-based CO2 emissions, and it's actually by 80%, like Lindsay said. It's going to pretty much, that's like a huge deal because like for the whole save the planet kind of thing, and like we know that carbon dioxide in the air is not so good for it, so it's going to bring it down. I also saw that in my research that there's a marginal increase in fuel efficiency. According to private planes, it says thanks to Sustainable Aviation Fuel, or SAF, having a higher energy density than conventional jet fuel, and an increase of 1.5% to 3% in fuel efficiency can occur. So obviously we're not like super far in this phase of using sustainable aviation fuel quite yet. So these are kind of just speculations of what could happen in the future. And so fuel efficiency will hopefully go up. It's not a for sure thing, but they're hoping so. And obviously the airlines will be all over this because they want to make more money and more profits and want to have the most fuel efficient planes. And like I said earlier, the main reason why we need to do this is pretty much to save the planet. And by doing sustainable aviation fuel, we're going to have like new jobs and additional jobs to help fund this entire thing, or be able to create this entire thing. So it's pretty important for every other industry to do this as well. Then we'll go into disadvantages. So Matt already talked about the cost, so I'm not going to hit on that too much, but obviously as of right now, everything's really new. We don't have a super great cost efficient way to do this. Another disadvantage to it is like you have a really bad competitive disadvantage if you are using that, if you're using sustainable aviation fuel right now compared to other airlines not using it, because it's so new. So it's going to make sure, like, it's, if you start with that right now, you're obviously not going to, like, you're not going to have the advantage as an airline who's not using it as of right now. Collecting cooking oils expensive and time consuming. There's a quote from Simple Flying that I have, and it says, in the Netherlands, we have a cooperation with one of the used cooking oil collectors called HAVI or Havy, and they're running from McDonald's to McDonald's to select the used cooking oil from the French fries that we in our refinery in Rotterdam then turn into fuel. And just think about doing that every month around the globe and across the planet. It is costly not only to collect it, but also to treat it. So obviously, it's not the greatest thing for us. And if we're going to be able to produce this in the long term, we're gonna have to fix this for scaling issues. Passenger costs. So right now, airlines will have to decide like if they're gonna charge more for a flight, or if you're, or if they're just gonna eat the profits because of early. It's gonna be too much of a big cost. And then, if you think about it, would you pay more for a flight ran off of sustainable aviation fuel compared to traditional jet fuel? And if you, maybe not, but do you think everyone around the world would? Probably not. So it's kind of one of those ideas as well. Yeah. And then government interaction. So we're going to probably need government to get involved if we're going to make this actually happen. And they're going to have to like be able to encourage it. So there's probably going to be more laws saying you need sustainable aviation fuel inside your aircraft to make it so it'll actually start. And scaling, as of right now, we don't have the facilities to mass produce this to the scale we need. It's very small starting right now, so we're gonna have to find a way to make that bigger as well. And then we'll move on to the next one. So what are other companies doing to utilize sustainable aviation fuel? So Delta, United Airlines, and Airbus are all trying to like start incorporating it. So Delta pledges to become carbon neutral as of March 2020, and they're obviously buying planes and getting the facilities that will be able to run off of sustainable aviation fuel. United's really similar too. They also said that they want to be, they have made a pledge to be 100% green by 2050. So by doing this, you like already know they're like trying to do their best to be more better for the planet and carbon, like lower that carbon footprint. United has also recently committed to the purchase of 1.5 billion gallons of sustainable aviation fuel from an aviation fuel company. So they're starting this off and they're doing their best to get involved. So as a pilot, like all of us are, this is going to affect us greatly because we're going to need, we're most likely going to be able to fly sustainable aviation fuel aircrafts in the future, because if you're like Delta or something that way, if you're a Delta pilot or a United pilot, then we're probably going to need to be able to fly those. And then Airbus and Boeing are starting to build those airplanes that are more eco-friendly and better for the world, you know. And they're also planning on building the engines and everything for it as well. So they're kind of trying to do their best to get into a position to do that. So yeah. Next line. So then here we have a short little video that kind of wraps up a lot of what we have. So have Lindsay play that.
I just want to confirm you guys can see the screen.
Yep.
With the video. Okay, perfect.
What is sustainable aviation fuel? Chances are you're getting lost in all the environmentally friendly fuels we use to make travel sustainable. But there is one you might want to remember, because it's a game changer for aviation and for the planet. It's sustainable aviation fuel, also known as SAF. So what is SAF? Well, first, it's sustainable. It can be made from almost any material. From plants, for example, halophytes, a plant that grows in salt water. From used cooking oil. From solid municipal waste, everything from lawn clippings to tree branches to used clothes, even food scraps and non-recyclable bottles. But this is what SAF can't be. It can't be made from anything that diverts land use from food crops, or destroys forests, or consumes too much fresh water, because that's simply not sustainable. The most important benefit of SAF is that it reduces life cycle emissions of carbon dioxide, CO2, which is one of the world's most dangerous greenhouse gases, by up to 80%. How? When a plant grows, it absorbs CO2 from the atmosphere. But when it's burned as jet fuel, it releases that CO2 back again. So, over the life of that plant, the CO2 impact is almost neutral. And that makes SAF a very effective way to reduce the aviation impact on climate change. Also important to remember, SAF is being used right now. Because it's so similar to fossil fuel, it can be mixed with regular jet fuel with no need to modify the engine. So far, more than 250,000 flights have used SAF. The biggest problem right now is scale. We need more SAF, we need a lot more. We're currently producing tens of millions of litres a year, a fraction of global demand for jet fuel. We need to be producing billions of litres. There is enough raw material to power the world's airline fleet using SAF, but governments, industry and airlines have to invest more. We're at the beginning of a long journey, but the simple fact is we have a revolutionary new fuel that is already starting to make flying more sustainable.
So in summary, sustainable aviation fuel is produced from sustainable materials, similar to jet fuel.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of ETA Florence Renewable Energies, technical organizer.
Sorry. It's similar to jet fuel, so we can hopefully, after all the testing is done, we can use it in similar aircrafts, and new aircraft will not have to be produced. And SAF has a significantly smaller carbon footprint. And then there's those 3 key elements that the video summarized, is that it has to be sustainable, alternative, and fuel, and meet all of those certifications.
It also needs to make sure that sustainable aviation fuel, we need to know, like, understand the costs of it and all the advantages and disadvantages. We also want to make sure that as pilots, because that's what our whole plan is, as pilots, we want to make sure that we understand what this is and like how it's going to affect us in the future. So if we worked at a company like Delta or United or most likely any airline in the future is probably going to have incorporated sustainable aviation fuel. So it's something that I think everyone should try and learn a little bit more about, and hopefully get a little bit better sense of learning with it, I guess.
And the other thing with sustainable aviation fuel is it needs to meet the performance standards, if not be better, be reliable, where it's not going to affect safety at all. And yeah, as we go forward, we can sustain and use it throughout the future.
I think there's also a couple questions that like we should ask ourselves, and pretty much I think like, do you think everyone in the future would be like plan on using this? Like, say if it costs more for a flight, do you think more people will be like apt to using it still to help the world, or do you think it's more about cost effect or money effect? Is one question I had. Oh, sorry, you can go, Lindsay.
I just wanted to add that I know I've recently booked flights for my honeymoon, and when you go on Google Flights to book flights, it will tell you the type of aircraft and the amount of emissions. I don't know how that plays into cost, because I'm kind of poor, so I'm looking for the cheapest flight, but that is available information when people are booking flights. So if you're very conscious about that, maybe that's I don't know if I would pay more if I, made more, I would probably be a little more conscious of it. But I think it is something that people would think about.
Yeah. And as of right now, I forgot to add during my part, right now they're like kind of just adding like sustainable aviation fuel and like seeing like, hey, if we can make this work or not. And they're adding it to like normal fuel because like the performance is so similar between the two. So between like jet fuel and sustainable aviation fuel, so like they can like actually mix them together and be able to fly off of them. Obviously this is really brand new kind of stuff, but they do think hopefully they'll be able to do 100% of sustainable aviation fuel, but it's not, as of right now, they're kind of just mixing it together and then sending it off. But there has been, I believe, one airplane who has had 100% sustainable aviation fuel. But yeah, as of right now, the scaling is not even near what it needs to be for it to be effective.
So hopefully from this presentation, you have gained these completion standards. You have a clear understanding of what sustainable energy or SAF is and why there is a demand for it and why the demand will be growing in the future. You can compare the differences in the environmental impact and cost of sustainable aviation fuel compared to other fuels used, and you are able to analyze the advantages and disadvantages of sustainable aviation fuel and hopefully make that decision for yourself, whether it's something you would pay more for or something worth looking into a little bit more before the next time you fly. As pilots, we think about it a little bit different than a regular consumer would. They probably have no idea what goes into it. So it's important for people in the aviation industry to be aware of it and to spread that word to people who are just consumers. And I think that's all we've got. So thank you guys.
Yep, thank you. Not really sure how to stop this.